Morning sun filtered through the tall windows of Kensington Palace, casting long shadows across the polished marble floors. Princess stood at the edge of the grand staircase, her fingers tracing the ornate banister as she watched the courtyard below. Staff members moved with practiced efficiency, preparing for another day of royal duties, but her mind was elsewhere. The weight of recent events pressed heavily on her shoulders, and the constant scrutiny from certain family members had become almost unbearable. William emerged from his study, his footsteps echoing softly in the corridor. He had been up since dawn, reviewing security reports and correspondence, but his attention kept drifting to his wife's increasingly withdrawn demeanor. Over the past few weeks, he had noticed subtle changes in her behavior, the way she hesitated before entering rooms, how her smile seemed forced during public appearances, and most concerning of all, how she had begun avoiding certain family gatherings altogether. "You're up early," William said softly, approaching with careful steps. He had learned to read her moods like a weathered sailor reads storm clouds, and today the signs were particularly troubling. Turned, offering him a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "I couldn't sleep. There's so much to think about with the upcoming engagements." Her voice carried a weariness that went beyond simple fatigue, and William felt a familiar protective instinct surge within him. The truth was far more complex than sleepless nights over royal duties. Had been dealing with increasing pressure from various quarters of the royal family, particularly from Prince, whose watchful presence had become a source of constant anxiety. His comments, always carefully worded but unmistakably critical, had begun to take their toll. Whether it was subtle questioning of her parenting decisions, veiled suggestions about her public appearances, or his unsolicited advice about royal protocol, his interference had created an atmosphere of tension that even the palace staff had begun to notice. William moved closer, gently placing his hand on his arm. "You know you can tell me anything, don't you?" His voice was low, filled with the kind of intimate concern that only came from years of marriage and deep understanding. "I've been watching you these past weeks, and I know something's troubling you beyond the usual pressures." His composure wavered for a moment, her carefully maintained royal facade showing cracks. She had been trying to handle the situation on her own, believing it was her responsibility to navigate the complex family dynamics without burdening William. But the isolation had become overwhelming, and the constant feeling of being watched and judged had begun to affect every aspect of her daily life. "It's nothing I can't handle," she said, but her voice lacked conviction. "Just the usual adjustments that come with royal life." William studied her face, noting the dark circles under her eyes that makeup couldn't quite conceal, the way her shoulders seemed perpetually tense, and how she had begun choosing her words even more carefully than usual. These were not the signs of someone dealing with ordinary royal pressures. These were the symptoms of someone under siege. The palace had always been a place where unspoken tensions simmered beneath the surface of polite conversation and formal protocol. But lately, the atmosphere had become particularly charged, especially whenever was present. His recent increased involvement in family affairs, ostensibly due to his desire to be helpful during a transitional period for the monarchy, had created ripple effects that touched everyone, but seemed to focus particularly intensely on. During the previous week's family dinner, William had observed his behavior with growing unease. The older prince had a way of asking questions that seemed innocent enough on the surface, but carried undertones that made visibly uncomfortable. Comments about her handling of the children's education, subtle criticisms of her choice of charities, and pointed observations about her public speaking style had all been delivered with the kind of smile that made them difficult to challenge directly. "Uncle seems very interested in your activities lately," William had mentioned to after that dinner, testing the waters to see if she would open up about what he had observed. Had stiffened at the mention of his name, her response carefully neutral. "He's always been very attentive to family matters." The word attentive had been chosen with deliberate care, William realized. It was diplomatic enough to avoid outright criticism, but it carried a weight of meaning that spoke to the true nature of his behavior. William had begun to understand that his wife was dealing with a form of psychological pressure that was as real as it was difficult to prove or address through normal channels. The breakfast room of their private quarters had become a refuge where could speak more freely, away from the formal dining areas where every conversation might be overheard or reported. It was here that William began to piece together the full extent of what his wife had been enduring. "He watches everything I do," finally admitted one morning, her voice barely above a whisper. Every decision I make with the children, every charity I choose to support, every speech I give, he always has an opinion, always has a suggestion for how it could be done better. William felt his jaw tighten as he listened. The picture painting was one of constant supervision and criticism, delivered under the guise of family concern and royal duty. It was a sophisticated form of harassment that relied on the victim's reluctance to complain about what might appear to outsiders as helpful guidance from an experienced family member. Yesterday, he asked me 3 times about my decision to visit the children's hospital, continued, her hands wrapped around her teacup as if seeking warmth. Each time, he phrased it differently, but the message was the same, that perhaps my time would be better spent on more traditional royal engagements. The insidiousness of his approach was becoming clear to William. By questioning choices repeatedly and from different angles, he was undermining her confidence and making her second-guess decisions that should have been straightforward. It was a tactic that relied on accumulation. No single comment was egregious enough to warrant confrontation, but together they created a pattern of psychological pressure that was steadily eroding sense of autonomy. William had been raised in the royal household and understood its complex dynamics better than most. He knew that direct confrontation would likely backfire, potentially making situation worse while giving the opportunity to present himself as the wronged party. The solution would need to be more subtle, more strategic. "I want you to know that you don't have to handle this alone anymore," William said, reaching across the table to Take's hand. "Whatever's happening, whatever pressure you're feeling, we'll deal with it together." The relief in his eyes was immediate and profound. For weeks, she had been carrying the burden of his attention alone, believing that complaining would make her appear weak or unable to handle her royal responsibilities. William's acknowledgement that something was indeed wrong validated her experiences and opened the door for them to address the situation as a united front. That afternoon, William made several phone calls from his private office. He spoke with his personal protection officer, his private secretary, and most importantly, with his father's senior staff. He was careful not to make direct accusations, but he made it clear that he was concerned about his wife's and that he expected any issues affecting her to be brought to his immediate attention. The next few days brought subtle but noticeable changes in the palace routine. William began accompanying to more family meetings, his presence serving as both support and deterrent. When attempted to engage in his typical pattern of questioning and criticism, William would smoothly redirect the conversation or provide backup for his decisions. "His work with the children's charities has been remarkable," William would say when questioned her choices. "The positive feedback from the organizations has been overwhelming." These interventions were carefully calibrated to appear natural and supportive rather than defensive. William was establishing a new dynamic where his decisions had his explicit backing, making it much more difficult to continue his campaign of subtle undermining. The change-in was gradual but unmistakable. Her posture improved, her sleep became more regular, and most importantly, her natural warmth and confidence began to return. The smile that had seemed forced for weeks became genuine again, and she began to engage more actively in conversations rather than remaining guardedly quiet. However, William knew that this was just the beginning. Behavior patterns suggested a deep-seated need to exert control and influence, and simply blocking his access to might not be enough to resolve the underlying issue. A more comprehensive strategy would be needed, one that addressed not just the immediate problem but the broader family dynamics that had allowed such behavior to flourish. As William tucked their children into bed that night, listening to their excited chatter about upcoming school events and weekend plans, he reflected on the precious normalcy of family life that strength and grace made possible. The thought that someone was deliberately trying to undermine that stability filled him with a protective determination that went beyond his role as a husband to encompass his responsibilities as a future king. The evening news played softly in the background of their private sitting room as William shared a quiet dinner. The coverage included brief mention of upcoming royal engagements, and William noticed how his expression remained relaxed and confident as she discussed her planned activities. This was he had fallen in love with, passionate about her causes, thoughtful in her approach, and naturally charismatic in her interactions with the public. "I've been thinking about expanding the early childhood development program," said, her eyes bright with enthusiasm. The research we've been supporting is showing such promising results. William smiled, recognizing the return of his wife's innovative spirit. This was exactly the kind of forward-thinking initiative that had been subtly discouraging, suggesting instead that focus on more traditional and less ambitious projects. The fact that she was once again thinking creatively and ambitiously was a clear sign that his protective measures were working. But even as he celebrated this return to normalcy, William remained vigilant. He knew that behavior was likely to continue in some form, and that protecting would require ongoing attention and strategy. The palace was a complex ecosystem where personal relationships intersected with constitutional responsibilities, and navigating that complexity while safeguarding his families would be one of his greatest challenges. As they prepared for bed, turned to William with an expression of gratitude that needed no words. The unspoken communication between them had always been one of the strongest aspects of their relationship, and tonight it carried the weight of shared understanding and mutual protection. "Thank you," said simply, her hand resting on his arm. William covered her hand with his own. "Always," he replied, the single word carrying a promise that extended far beyond the immediate situation. It was a commitment to stand between his wife and any force that sought to diminish her spirit or undermine her contributions to their family and the crown. The palace settled into its nighttime quiet, but William remained awake longer than usual, his mind working through the implications of what they had discovered and the strategies they would need to employ going forward. Protecting was not just a personal priority, it was essential to the future of the monarchy itself. Her unique ability to connect with people, her innovative approach to royal duties, and her genuine compassion made her an invaluable asset to the crown's future. As he finally drifted off to sleep, William's last conscious thought was a renewed appreciation for strength in dealing with pressure for as long as she had. Her resilience in the face of such persistent undermining demonstrated exactly why she deserved not just his protection, but his unwavering admiration and support. The following morning brought an unexpected test of William's resolve. A family meeting had been scheduled to discuss upcoming holiday arrangements, and William knew that would be in attendance. As they prepared to leave their private quarters, he noticed subtle signs of anxiety returning, the careful smoothing of her dress, the extra moment spent checking her appearance, and the way she took a deeper breath before opening the door. "Remember what we talked about," William said quietly as they walked through the corridors toward the meeting room. "You don't have to justify your decisions to anyone. You have my complete support." Nodded, but William could see the tension in her shoulders. Months of constant scrutiny had created an almost Pavlovian response to family gatherings. The anticipation of having her choices questioned and her judgment subtly undermined had become so ingrained that even William's protection couldn't immediately erase the anxiety. The meeting room was already occupied when they arrived. King Charles sat at the head of the mahogany table, various family members arranged around it in order of precedence. Was positioned where he could easily observe everyone, his expression pleasant but alert. William guided to her seat with a protective hand at the small of her back, a gesture that was both supportive and subtly territorial. "Good morning, everyone," Charles began, consulting the agenda before him. "I thought we should discuss the Christmas arrangements early this year, given the various commitments everyone has." The conversation began conventionally enough, with discussions of travel schedules and traditional events. Participated naturally, her suggestions about children's activities and charitable appearances well received by the group. William watched carefully, noting how the older prince's attention seemed disproportionately focused on contributions. "I've been thinking about your idea for the Christmas charity visits," interjected smoothly when there was a pause in conversation. "While it's certainly well-intentioned, I wonder if we might consider whether it sends the right message about the family's priorities during the holiday season." The comment was perfectly crafted. It acknowledged good intentions while simultaneously questioning her judgment and implying that her ideas might be inappropriate for the royal family. William felt his protective instincts flare, but he forced himself to respond calmly and strategically. "Actually, Uncle's charitable focus during Christmas has been incredibly well received by the public," William said, his voice warm but firm. "The palace has received overwhelmingly positive feedback about her approach to balancing family traditions with community service." He reached into his briefcase and pulled out a folder that his staff had prepared at his request. The public opinion surveys show significant approval for initiatives. In fact, they've helped modernize the public's perception of the royal family's relevance to contemporary life. William had deliberately brought data to support's work, knowing that criticisms were often based on personal opinion rather than factual evidence. By presenting concrete proof of success, he was making it much more difficult for to continue his pattern of undermining her decisions. Shot William a grateful look, and he could see some of the tension leaving her posture. This was exactly the kind of support she had needed, but hadn't known how to ask for. The validation of her work through official feedback and data gave her contributions weight that couldn't easily dismiss. "Of course, the public response is important," said, his smile remaining in place but his tone carrying a slight edge. "I'm simply thinking about the long-term implications for royal tradition and protocol." King Charles looked up from his notes, his expression thoughtful. "What specific concerns do you have about tradition?" The question was asked mildly, but it forced to articulate his objections rather than leaving them as vague insinuations. William recognized his father's diplomatic skill in action. By asking for specifics, Charles was requiring to either make concrete accusations or admit that his concerns were largely personal preference. It was a subtle but effective way of supporting without creating direct confrontation. Seemed to realize he was being put in a difficult position. "Well, I suppose my concerns are more about maintaining the dignity and solemnity that the royal family has traditionally represented during religious holidays. I think's work enhances rather than diminishes royal dignity," William responded immediately. "Her ability to connect with people while maintaining appropriate protocol has been one of her greatest strengths. The charities she visits consistently report that her presence brings both practical help and genuine inspiration to their communities." Found her voice, encouraged by William's support and her father-in-law's fair questioning. "I try to ensure that my holiday engagements reflect both the joy of the season and the royal family's commitment to service. The children and families we visit see the monarchy as caring about their daily struggles, not just as a distant institution." Her words carried quiet passion, and William could see how they resonated with other family members around the table. This was at her best articulate, compassionate, and clearly committed to meaningful work. The contrast with vague concerns about protocol was striking. "That's beautifully put," said Anne, who rarely spoke at these meetings but whose opinion carried significant weight. "Your approach reminds me of the Queen Mother's ability to make people feel valued and seen." The comparison to the beloved Queen Mother was powerful praise, and William Saw's expression tighten almost imperceptibly. Anne's support was particularly significant because she was known for her no-nonsense approach to royal duty and her skepticism of anything that seemed like mere public relations. As the meeting continued, William noticed a shift in the dynamics. Other family members began asking directly about her plans and offering suggestions for additional activities. Instead of defending her ideas, she was now being invited to expand them. Attempts to redirect the conversation back to his concerns about tradition were politely acknowledged but not given the weight they had previously carried. After the meeting concluded, William and walked slowly back toward their quarters. The change in his demeanor was remarkable. Her step was lighter, her posture, and for the first time in weeks, she seemed genuinely relaxed after a family interaction. "That felt different," said softly as they reached the privacy of their sitting room. "It was different," William agreed. "When you have proper support and when people see the evidence of your success, criticisms lose their power." They settled onto the comfortable sofa where they had shared so many important conversations. Curled up beside William, her head resting on his shoulder in a gesture that spoke to her renewed sense of security. "I didn't realize how much his constant questioning had affected me until I felt what it was like without it," admitted. "I was starting to doubt myself about everything, my parenting, my charitable work, even simple conversations with staff." William's arm tightened around her protectively. The full extent of psychological campaign was becoming clearer, and it was worse than he had initially realized. The systematic undermining of confidence had reached into every aspect of her royal life, creating a pervasive sense of inadequacy that was completely unjustified by her actual performance. "We're going to make sure this doesn't happen again," William said firmly. "I should have noticed sooner what was happening." Shifted to look at him directly. "You couldn't have known. He was very careful about when and how he made his comments. Most of the time, other people weren't around to witness it. This revelation added another layer to William's understanding of the situation. Had been deliberately isolating for his criticisms, creating a pattern where she couldn't easily seek support or validation from others. It was a sophisticated form of manipulation that relied on privacy and plausible deniability. "Tell me more about that," William encouraged gently. "I need to understand the full scope of what you've been dealing with." Described a pattern of behavior that was even more calculated than William had suspected. Had developed a habit of approaching when she was alone or in small groups, offering criticism disguised as helpful advice. He would question her decisions about the children's activities during family gatherings when William was engaged in conversations with other relatives. He would corner her during charity events to suggest that her approach might be misunderstood by the public. "Last month at the hospital opening, he pulled me aside twice to suggest that I was spending too much time with individual patients," recounted. "He said it might appear that I was playing favorites or that I didn't understand the proper protocol for such events." William felt his anger rising as he listened to these examples. Each incident, taken individually, could be dismissed as well-meaning guidance from an experienced family member. But the pattern revealed a systematic campaign to undermine confidence and independence. The timing of these interactions, always when she was isolated from William's support, showed a level of calculation that was deeply troubling. "From now on, we change how we handle these situations," William said decisively. "First, you're never going to face these family meetings or events without backup again. If I can't be there, we'll arrange for someone else you trust to be present." He began outlining a comprehensive strategy that would address both the immediate problem and the underlying dynamics that had allowed behavior to continue unchecked. The plan included briefing key staff members about the situation, ensuring had documentation of her successful initiatives, and creating protocols for family interactions that would minimize opportunities for isolated criticism. "Second, we're going to be proactive about highlighting your successes," William continued. "Not just to counter criticisms, but to make sure everyone understands the value of your contributions." Looked uncertain about this aspect of the plan. "I don't want to appear boastful or defensive." "There's nothing boastful about properly communicating your achievements," William reassured her. "The royal family benefits from your success, and that success deserves to be recognized and celebrated." They spent the next hour developing specific strategies for different scenarios. William's military training and experience with strategic planning proved invaluable as they worked through various contingencies. They discussed how to respond to direct criticism, how to redirect conversations that became uncomfortable, and how to ensure always had the information and support she needed to defend her decisions. "The key is to change the dynamic from reactive to proactive," William explained. "Instead of defending against attacks, we're going to establish such a strong foundation for your work that attacks become obviously unfounded." As they talked, natural confidence began to reassert itself. The combination of William's unwavering support and a concrete plan for moving forward gave her the emotional security she needed to think clearly about her role and responsibilities. For the first time in months, she began to feel excited about upcoming projects rather than anxious about potential criticism. That evening, William made several important phone calls. He spoke with his private secretary about adjusting schedules to ensure he could attend more family functions. He contacted the heads of key charities to request detailed reports on the impact of her work. Most importantly, he had a carefully worded conversation with his father's office about the need for clear communication regarding family members' roles and responsibilities. William was careful not to make direct accusations against, but he made it clear that questions had been raised about mixed messages regarding activities. He suggested that clearer guidelines from the top would help ensure that all family members were working toward the same goals rather than inadvertently creating confusion or conflict. The response from his father's office was immediately supportive. King Charles had always valued contributions to the royal family, and the suggestion that someone might be undermining her work was taken seriously. Within hours, William received confirmation that the issue would be addressed through appropriate channels. As William and prepared for bed that night, the atmosphere between them was lighter than it had been in months. His natural humor and warmth had returned, and she was already making plans for new initiatives that she had been hesitant to propose during her period of self-doubt. "I have an idea for a new program connecting urban children with nature experiences," said excitedly as she brushed her hair. "I was afraid to mention it before, but now I think it could be really impactful." William smiled, recognizing the return of his wife's innovative spirit. "Tell me about it," he encouraged, settling beside her to listen to her ideas. As outlined her vision for the new program, William was struck by both her creativity and her deep understanding of the issues she wanted to address. This was exactly the kind of forward-thinking initiative that the monarchy needed to remain relevant and meaningful to contemporary society. The fact that pressure had nearly prevented such valuable work from being developed highlighted the true cost of his interference. "This sounds incredible," William said when finished her explanation. "Let's set up meetings with your team next week to start developing it properly." The practical support and immediate action on her ideas was exactly what needed to fully regain her confidence. William was not just protecting her from criticism. He was actively enabling her to pursue her most ambitious and meaningful work. As they settled into sleep, William reflected on how quickly the situation had begun to improve once felt properly supported. Her resilience and strength had never been in question. She had simply needed the right environment to flourish again. Ensuring that environment remained stable and supportive would be an ongoing priority, but the foundation was now solidly in place. 3 weeks later, the effectiveness of William's protective strategy was being put to a significant test. The annual Royal Foundation Charity Gala was approaching, an event that required extensive coordination between family members and attracted intense media attention. Had been working for months on a presentation about childhood development initiatives, and William knew that would likely see this high-profile event as an opportunity to reassert his influence. The preparation meetings for the gala had become a careful dance of personalities and protocols. William made sure to attend every session, positioning himself as partner in both planning and presentation. Their teamwork was seamless, built on years of shared experience and mutual respect, but William remained vigilant for any signs that was attempting to undermine confidence. "The research findings on early intervention are remarkable," was explaining to the gathered planning committee, her voice strong and confident as she outlined the scientific basis for her proposed initiatives. "Children who receive targeted support in their first 5 years show measurably better outcomes in education, emotional regulation, and social development throughout their lives." William watched the faces around the table as spoke. Her expertise and passion were evident to everyone present, and the supporting data she presented was compelling. This was at her professional best: knowledgeable, articulate, and clearly committed to evidence-based approaches to social problems. Sat at the opposite end of the table, his expression attentive but unreadable. William had learned to interpret these moments of apparent interest as potential setup for later criticism. Rarely challenged directly in front of large groups, instead, he would wait for opportunities to question her approach in smaller settings or private conversations. "The budget allocation seems quite ambitious," commented when finished her presentation. His tone was carefully neutral, but William recognized the implied criticism. "I wonder if we might benefit from a more gradual approach, perhaps focusing on proven traditional methods before expanding into newer research areas." The comment was perfectly crafted to sound reasonable while undermining credibility. By describing her evidence-based approach as newer research areas and suggesting that proven traditional methods were more reliable, was positioning work as experimental and potentially irresponsible. William had anticipated this exact type of response and was prepared with a strategic counter. "Actually, Uncle, the research is citing represents decades of peer-reviewed studies from institutions like and Cambridge. The traditional approaches you're referencing often lack the rigorous evaluation methods that modern studies employ." He pulled out a tablet and displayed a chart showing comparative outcomes between traditional and evidence-based early intervention programs. "The data consistently shows that children in programs like those is proposing achieve better long-term outcomes across multiple measures of success." The visual evidence was compelling, and William could see other committee members nodding as they absorbed the information. More importantly, he was demonstrating that work was based on solid scientific foundations rather than personal preference or untested theories. Shot William a grateful glance before adding, "We've also consulted with international experts in child development to ensure our approach aligns with global best practices. The pilot programs we've already implemented have exceeded their target outcomes by significant margins." Her follow-up was perfectly timed and demonstrated that she had not only theoretical knowledge but practical experience with successful implementation. The combination of Williams' supporting data and demonstrated results made implied criticism appear uninformed rather than cautious. King Charles, who had been listening intently from his position at the head of the table, leaned forward with obvious interest. "Could you elaborate on the outcomes from the pilot programs? I'd like to understand the specific improvements you're seeing." The king's direct engagement was significant for several reasons. It demonstrated his personal interest in work, positioned her as the primary expert on the topic, and effectively sidelined his attempt to redirect the conversation toward more traditional approaches. Responded with detailed examples of improved outcomes for children in the pilot programs, sharing specific stories of transformation while maintaining appropriate privacy protections. Her ability to balance hard data with human impact stories showcased exactly why her approach to royal duties had been so successful with the public. One little boy who was struggling with severe anxiety in school situations is now confidently participating in group activities and showing significant improvement in academic performance, shared. His teachers report that the change has been remarkable, and his family has seen improvements in his behavior at home as well. William watched his expression as spoke, noting the subtle signs of frustration as his attempts to undermine her credibility failed to gain traction. The combination of strong preparation, solid support, and his own expertise was proving to be an effective defense against psychological tactics. After the meeting concluded, William and walked together toward their car. The spring afternoon was beautiful and seemed energized by the successful presentation and positive response from the committee. "That felt different from previous meetings," observed as they settled into the back seat of their vehicle. "I felt like my ideas were being evaluated on their merits rather than questioned based on assumptions about my capabilities." William nodded, pleased that had noticed the changed dynamic. When you have proper preparation and support, and when your work speaks for itself, it becomes much harder for anyone to dismiss your contributions unfairly. The drive back to Kensington Palace gave them time to discuss the strategic aspects of what had just occurred. William explained how he had anticipated likely criticisms and prepared responses that would counter them with factual evidence rather than defensive arguments. "The key is to shift the conversation from opinion to evidence," William explained. "When someone questions your judgment or expertise, the most effective response is to demonstrate the factual basis for your decisions." Absorbed this lesson with the same thoughtful attention she brought to all her royal duties. She had always been intelligent and capable, but's campaign of subtle undermining had made her question her own judgment. With William's support and a clearer understanding of how to respond to criticism, her natural confidence was returning stronger than before. Back at the palace, they found their children engaged in afternoon activities with their tutors. The normalcy of family life provided a grounding contrast to the complex political dynamics they navigated in their royal roles. William was struck once again by how strength and wisdom as a mother informed her approach to public service. "Mummy, look what I made," their youngest called out, running toward with a colorful drawing that depicted what appeared to be a castle surrounded by flowers. Knelt down to examine the artwork with the same focused attention she had given to the charity presentation earlier. "This is beautiful. Tell me about all these flowers. Did you choose the colors for a special reason?" As William watched interact with their child, he was reminded of why her approach to royal duties was so effective. Her genuine interest in people, her ability to see potential in every situation, and her natural warmth were qualities that couldn't be taught or faked. These same qualities that made her an exceptional mother also made her uniquely effective in her royal role. Later that evening, William received a call from his private secretary with an interesting update. Word of successful presentation had already reached senior palace staff, and there had been informal discussions about expanding her role in the Royal Foundation's strategic planning. The positive response to her evidence-based approach had generated interest in having her lead a new initiative focused on scientific research into social issues. This could be exactly the kind of platform needs to establish herself as a thought leader in her areas of expertise, William discussed with as they reviewed the proposal. It would give her work official recognition and make it much more difficult for anyone to question her authority in these areas. Was intrigued by the possibility, but characteristically thoughtful about the implications. I want to make sure I can do justice to such a responsibility. The research component would be extensive, and I'd need to ensure I have the right team and resources. William admired's careful approach to new opportunities. Rather than jumping at the chance for expanded recognition, she was thinking through the practical requirements for success. This kind of thoughtful preparation had always been one of her greatest strengths. "We'll make sure you have everything you need," William assured her. "This is exactly the kind of work you're meant to be doing, and it's time the institution fully recognized and supported that." Over the following days, William worked behind the scenes to ensure his potential new role would be properly structured and supported. He met with senior advisors, reviewed budget allocations, and discussed staffing needs. His goal was to create a framework that would allow to pursue her most ambitious work while providing protection against the kind of interference she had previously experienced. The announcement of his expanded role came during a routine palace briefing, but the response was immediate and overwhelmingly positive. Media coverage focused on her innovative approach and the early success of her pilot programs. Charitable organizations expressed enthusiasm about the potential for expanded evidence-based initiatives. Most importantly for William, the announcement effectively established authority in her areas of expertise. Anyone questioning her decisions would now be challenging not just her personal judgment, but the official position of the Royal Foundation, and by extension, the monarchy itself. His reaction to the news was carefully controlled but telling. He offered public congratulations that were appropriately gracious, but William noticed that his attempts to engage in private conversations about her work became less frequent and more cautious. The dynamic had fundamentally shifted, was no longer vulnerable to isolated criticism because her work now had institutional backing and public recognition. This pattern of undermining her confidence through private questioning had become much more difficult to maintain. "I feel like I can breathe again," told William one evening as they reviewed congratulatory messages from colleagues and organizations around the world. "Not just because of the recognition, but because I finally understand how to protect myself from that kind of psychological pressure." William felt deep satisfaction at her words. Protecting had never been just about shielding her from his behavior. It had been about helping her rediscover her own strength and value. The combination of strategic support and its inherent capabilities had created a foundation that would serve her well throughout her royal career. The upcoming gala now held different significance. Rather than being a test of his ability to withstand potential criticism, it would be a celebration of her established expertise and expanding role. The transformation from defensive anxiety to confident anticipation represented a complete reversal of the psychological dynamics that had been troubling her for months. As they prepared for bed, William reflected on the lessons learned from this experience. Protecting someone you love sometimes requires more than emotional support. It requires strategic thinking, careful preparation, and the creation of structural changes that address underlying problems rather than just their symptoms. "Thank you for believing in me when I was struggling to believe in myself," said softly as they settled into sleep. William's response carried the weight of both personal love and shared commitment to their royal duties. "Your work is too important for anything to undermine it. Our children and the country need what you have to offer." The truth of those words had been demonstrated over the past weeks. His innovative approach to royal service represented the future of the monarchy's relevance to contemporary society. Protecting her ability to pursue that work was not just a personal priority for William. It was a constitutional responsibility that extended far beyond their private relationship. The Royal Foundation Charity Gala arrived with all the grandeur and scrutiny that accompanied major royal events. The ballroom at Palace had been transformed into an elegant showcase for the charitable work that defined the modern monarchy's public service mission. Distinguished guests from around the world filled the ornate space, their conversations mixing multiple languages and representing diverse perspectives on global humanitarian challenges. Stood before her dressing room mirror, making final adjustments to her evening gown. The deep blue fabric complemented her sapphire jewelry, but more importantly, she felt genuinely confident about the evening ahead. The months of psychological pressure seemed like a distant memory compared to the sense of purpose and authority she now carried. "You look stunning," William said as he entered the room, adjusting his own formal wear. "But more than that, you look ready to change the world." Turned to him with a smile that reflected both gratitude and renewed determination. "I feel ready. For the first time in months, I'm excited rather than anxious about a major royal event." The transformation was remarkable to observe. His posture was straight and confident, her movements fluid rather than tense, and her eyes bright with anticipation. The woman who had been struggling with self-doubt just weeks earlier had been replaced by someone who clearly understood her own value and mission. As they made their way through the palace corridors toward the ballroom, William couldn't help but reflect on the journey that had brought them to this moment. The careful strategy they had developed together, the institutional support they had secured, and most importantly, his own resilience had combined to create a foundation of strength that could withstand any future challenges. The ballroom was already filled with guests when they arrived. Representatives from major international charities mingled with philanthropists, government officials, and royal family members. The atmosphere was one of serious purpose mixed with elegant celebration, exactly the tone that such events should strike. William noticed across the room, engaged in conversation with several prominent donors. The older prince looked distinguished in his formal wear, his manner charming and appropriate to the occasion. To external observers, there was nothing to suggest the complex family dynamics that had been playing out behind the scenes. "Your Royal Highnesses," approached Lady Harrison, the director of one of key partner organizations. "Princess, I cannot tell you how excited our team is about your presentation this evening. The preview materials you shared have generated tremendous interest in our international network." Responded warmly, discussing the technical aspects of her research with the kind of detailed knowledge that demonstrated her deep engagement with the subject matter. William listened with pride as his wife explained complex concepts in accessible terms, making her expertise available to both specialists and general audience members. "The longitudinal studies are particularly compelling," was explaining. "When we follow children for 5 to 10 years after early intervention, we see sustained improvements that justify the initial investment many times over." Lady Harrison nodded enthusiastically. "The economic argument is as strong as the humanitarian one. Preventing problems is always more cost-effective than treating them after they develop." William appreciated how had learned to frame her work in terms that resonated with different audiences. Her natural compassion provided the emotional foundation, but she had developed the analytical skills to present compelling arguments to policymakers and funders who required different kinds of evidence. The formal presentation portion of the evening began with King Charles offering welcoming remarks that emphasized the royal family's commitment to evidence-based charitable work. His introduction was particularly warm and specific, highlighting her innovative approach and the measurable success of her initiatives. "Princess has brought a fresh perspective to our understanding of how royal service can most effectively address contemporary challenges," the king said. "Her commitment to rigorous research and measurable outcomes represents the future of meaningful philanthropy." The introduction served multiple purposes beyond simple ceremony. It established authority in front of an international audience, positioned her work as representing the monarchy's official direction, and made it clear that her approaches had the full support of the institution's leadership. Took the stage with poise and confidence, her presence commanding immediate attention from the distinguished audience. William watched from his position in the front row, noting how naturally she commanded respect and engagement from people who were accustomed to evaluating presentations by world leaders and international experts. "Ladies and distinguished guests," began, her voice clear and strong throughout the ballroom. "Tonight I want to share with you not just research findings or policy recommendations, but stories of transformation that demonstrate what becomes possible when we invest in human potential from the very beginning." Her opening immediately established the balance that had become her signature approach, combining hard data with human impact stories that made abstract concepts personally meaningful. William could see audience members leaning forward with interest, their body language indicating engagement rather than polite attention. Presentation unfolded with the kind of professional competence that made her previous self-doubt seem almost incomprehensible. She moved seamlessly between statistical evidence and individual case studies, used visual aids effectively to support rather than replace her verbal explanations, and maintained eye contact with different sections of the audience throughout her remarks. In one of our pilot programs, we worked with 200 families whose children showed early signs of developmental challenges, explained, displaying a chart that illustrated the outcomes data. After 2 years of targeted intervention, 85% of those children were performing at or above grade level, compared to 32% in the control group that received standard services. The data was compelling, but didn't let it stand alone. She immediately followed with a personal story that illustrated what those statistics meant in human terms. One mother wrote to tell us that her daughter, who had been struggling with severe anxiety that prevented her from participating in school activities, recently performed in the school play. The transformation wasn't just academic. It was about a child discovering her own courage and capabilities. William could see the emotional impact of words on the audience. This was exactly why her approach to royal service was so effective. She understood that lasting change required both intellectual understanding and emotional connection. As continued her presentation, William noticed position in the audience. The older prince was listening attentively, his expression giving nothing away, but William could sense his awareness that the evening was establishing credentials beyond any possibility of effective challenge. The question and answer session that followed formal presentation was particularly impressive. Audience members posed sophisticated questions about methodology, scalability, and funding models. Responses demonstrated not only her knowledge of the specific research, but her understanding of the broader policy and implementation contexts. How do you envision scaling these interventions to reach children in rural or communities? Asked a representative from an international development organization. His answer showed that she had thought carefully about practical implementation challenges. We're developing mobile intervention models that can adapt to different geographic and cultural contexts. The key is maintaining the core principles of early identification and targeted support while allowing flexibility in delivery methods. William was struck by the sophistication of thinking about her work. This wasn't someone who had stumbled into charitable activity as a royal duty. This was a person who had developed genuine expertise and was thinking strategically about maximizing impact. The formal presentations concluded with enthusiastic applause and immediate clustering of audience members around to continue conversations. William watched with satisfaction as international experts sought her opinions, funding organizations discussed potential collaborations, and government representatives expressed interest in policy implications. That was remarkable, approached Dr. Elizabeth, a renowned child development researcher from university. Your integration of research evidence with practical implementation is exactly what our field needs. Have you considered publishing these findings in peer-reviewed journals? The suggestion that work merited academic publication represented a level of professional recognition that transcended royal status. William could seize excitement at the possibility of contributing to scientific literature, adding another dimension to her expanding expertise. As the evening progressed, William observed a telling contrast between the attention was receiving and its position in the social dynamics. Where was surrounded by people eager to discuss her work and explore collaborations, found himself in more conventional social conversations that, while pleasant, lacked the substance and energy surrounding interactions. The shift in family dynamics was subtle but unmistakable. Had established herself as a thought leader whose opinions were sought on substantive issues, whilst role remained more traditional and ceremonial. The psychological leverage he had previously held through his position as an experienced family member had been replaced by demonstrated expertise and institutional backing. Later in the evening, during the more relaxed reception portion of the event, William overheard a conversation between two prominent donors that perfectly captured the transformation that had occurred. Princess' work is exactly the kind of evidence-based approach we look for in our funding decisions, one was saying to the other. The royal family's endorsement of rigorous research methods could influence charitable giving patterns across the entire sector. She's established herself as a serious professional, not just a ceremonial figure, the other replied. That presentation could have been delivered at any major academic conference or policy forum. William felt deep satisfaction at these comments. The goal had never been simply to protect from criticism, but to create conditions where her natural talents and hard work could be properly recognized and valued. The evening had demonstrated that those goals had been achieved comprehensively. As the formal event concluded and guests began to depart, family members gathered for a private debriefing in one of the palace's smaller reception rooms. The atmosphere was celebratory, with multiple people offering congratulations on her successful presentation. "That was outstanding," said Princess Anne, whose praise was particularly meaningful given her reputation for demanding high standards. "You've set a new bar for how royal charitable work can contribute to serious policy discussions." King Charles added his own observations about the positive response from international guests and the potential for expanded collaboration with major charitable organizations. The institutional endorsement of this approach was now complete and public, making any future questioning of her methods appear not just inappropriate, but uninformed. Offered his own congratulations, which were gracious and apparently sincere. "Well done." The audience response was clearly very positive. His tone was pleasant, but William noted that the comment was carefully limited to acknowledging the audience reaction rather than endorsing his work directly. However, the dynamics had changed so fundamentally that his opinion no longer carried the psychological weight it once had. Accepted his congratulations politely, but without the anxious attention to his approval that she would have shown months earlier. "Thank you," replied simply, her confidence evident in both her words and her relaxed posture. "The research speaks for itself, and I'm grateful for the opportunity to share it with such a distinguished audience." The response was perfectly calibrated, polite, but not deferential, confident, but not defensive. Had learned to interact with as an equal rather than as someone whose judgment she needed to court or fear. As the family gathering concluded and people began to disperse, William and found themselves walking together through the quiet palace corridors. The formal event was over, but its implications would resonate for years to come in terms of established position and future opportunities. "How does it feel to be officially recognized as an expert in your field?" William asked as they reached their private quarters. Smile was radiant with both accomplishment and relief. "It feels like coming home to myself. For months, I was so focused on defending my work that I almost forgot why I loved it in the first place." William understood exactly what she meant. Psychological pressure had forced into a defensive posture that overshadowed her natural enthusiasm and innovative thinking. Tonight had marked her return to the confident, forward-thinking professional she had always been meant to be. As they settled into their private sitting room, William reflected on the completeness of the transformation they had achieved together. Was not just protected from future criticism. She was positioned to lead conversations about the future of royal service and evidence-based philanthropy. "What's next?" William asked, knowing that his ambitious mind was already considering future possibilities. "I've been thinking about expanding the research to include international comparisons," replied, her eyes bright with plans and possibilities. "If we can demonstrate that these interventions work across different cultural contexts, it could influence policy recommendations for organizations like UNICEF and the World Health Organization." William smiled at the scope of his wife's thinking. The woman who had been questioning her own judgment just months earlier was now considering how her work might influence global policy. The transformation was complete, but more importantly, it was sustainable because it was built on solid foundations of expertise, institutional support, and personal strength. 6 months after the Royal Foundation Gala, the true measure of William's protective strategy could be seen in the transformation of not just confidence, but the entire family's dynamics. The autumn morning brought news that perfectly illustrated how completely the situation had changed. Had been invited to deliver the keynote address at the International Conference on Early Childhood Development, an honor typically reserved for the world's leading researchers and policymakers. William found in her study, surrounded by research papers and policy documents as she prepared for this latest milestone. The contrast with her state of mind a year earlier was remarkable. Where once she had struggled with self-doubt and anxiety, she now approached her work with the confidence of someone who knew her value and understood her impact. The conference organizers are expecting over 2,000 delegates from 60 countries, said, looking up from her preparation materials. 3 years ago, I could never have imagined speaking to such an audience about work I had developed myself. William settled into the chair opposite her desk, impressed as always by the depth of preparation that characterized its approach to her responsibilities. The transformation from someone who had been made to question her every decision to a recognized international expert represented one of the most satisfying achievements of his protective efforts. "You've earned this recognition through exceptional work," William reminded her. "The pilot programs have exceeded every success metric, the research has been validated by independent evaluation, and the policy recommendations are being implemented by governments across the Commonwealth." The factual basis for success was now so well established that any attempt to question her credentials would appear obviously motivated by personal rather than professional considerations. This solid foundation of achievement provided protection that went far beyond what William could offer through personal support alone. Their conversation was interrupted by a knock at the door. His private secretary entered with the morning's correspondence, including responses from various organizations wanting to collaborate on her expanding research initiatives. The volume and quality of these professional inquiries had grown dramatically over recent months, reflecting its established reputation in the field. "The World Health Organization has formally requested your input on their new guidelines for early childhood intervention," her secretary reported. "They're particularly interested in the economic impact models you've developed." William watched's face light up with genuine excitement. This was exactly the kind of meaningful engagement she had always hoped for in her royal role, the opportunity to contribute substantively to global efforts that would improve children's lives around the world. "Let's schedule a call with their policy team next week," responded immediately. "I'll want to review their current draft recommendations before we discuss specific contributions." The ease with which now navigated high-level professional opportunities reflected not just her growing expertise, but her renewed confidence in her own judgment. William's protection had been essential, but its transformation was ultimately the result of her own hard work and natural capabilities finally being allowed to flourish without interference. Later that morning, the family gathered for their weekly informal meeting to coordinate schedules and discuss upcoming events. The atmosphere in these gatherings had changed substantially since William implemented his protective strategy. Now participated as an equal contributor rather than someone whose decisions might be questioned or undermined. "This international conference will conflict with the agricultural show," noted the family's coordination secretary. "We'll need to adjust several other commitments to ensure proper coverage of both events." King Charles looked up from his schedule with obvious pride. "This conference takes priority. The international platform for her research is too important to compromise for domestic events, however traditional." The immediate deference to his work represented a complete reversal from the previous year's dynamics when her initiatives had sometimes been treated as less important than more traditional royal duties. William felt satisfaction at how thoroughly the family's priorities had been reordered to support expertise and achievements. Who was present for this planning session contributed to the scheduling discussion without any attempt to question priorities or suggest alternative approaches. His behavior had become consistently professional and supportive, though William suspected this change was motivated more by practical considerations than genuine enthusiasm. "The media coverage of conference work has been overwhelmingly positive," observed. "The international press particularly appreciates the research-based approach to charitable initiatives." The comment was carefully neutral, but represented a significant shift from his previous pattern of subtle criticism. William recognized this as an acknowledgement that its methods had proved successful beyond any reasonable dispute, making continued opposition impossible to maintain. After the family meeting concluded, William took a private walk through the palace gardens. The autumn air was crisp and invigorating, providing the perfect environment for reflection on how dramatically their circumstances had improved. "I've been thinking about what made the difference," said as they paused beside the ornamental fountain. "Obviously, your support was crucial, but I think the key was learning to trust my own expertise rather than constantly seeking validation from others." William nodded, recognizing the wisdom in its analysis. The protection was necessary to give you space to rediscover your confidence, but the real transformation came from within. You always had the knowledge and capabilities, you just needed the right environment to use them. They discussed the lessons learned from the experience, both for their personal relationship and for their approach to royal duties. The combination of strategic thinking, institutional support, and personal resilience had created a model that could be applied to future challenges. I want to make sure other family members don't face the kind of psychological pressure I experienced, said thoughtfully. Perhaps we could develop clearer protocols for how family members support each other's initiatives. William admired's desire to use her experience to help others rather than simply focusing on her own protection. This generous impulse was characteristic of her approach to both family relationships and public service. That afternoon brought a telephone call that perfectly illustrated how completely professional status had been transformed. Dr. Sarah Mitchell, the director of Center for Child Development, was calling to discuss a potential research collaboration that would involve as a co-principal investigator on a major longitudinal study. Princess, your work on early intervention outcomes has attracted significant attention in our research community, Dr. Mitchell explained during the call, which William listened to on speakerphone with permission. We're developing a multi-year study that would benefit enormously from your practical experience with program implementation. The invitation to serve as co-principal investigator on a research project represented the highest level of academic recognition. It meant that expertise was valued not just for her royal platform, but for her substantive contributions to scientific understanding. I'm honored by the invitation, responded professionally. Could you send me the detailed research proposal so I can review the methodology and timeline? I'll also need to discuss the time commitment with my team to ensure we can meet our obligations properly. William was impressed by his careful approach to the opportunity. Rather than accepting immediately based on the prestige involved, she was thinking through the practical requirements and her ability to contribute meaningfully to the research. After the call concluded, turned to William with an expression that mixed excitement with thoughtful consideration. This would be a significant commitment, but it could also position our work to influence policy development at the highest levels. William encouraged to pursue the opportunity while ensuring she had adequate support for the additional responsibilities. The institutional backing they had established would be crucial for managing the expanded workload that serious academic collaboration would require. We'll adjust whatever we need to adjust, William assured her. This is exactly the kind of platform your work deserves, and it will establish your credentials permanently in the academic community. The evening brought news that provided a perfect bookend to the day's developments. Received a handwritten note from a mother whose child had participated in one of the early pilot programs. The child was now excelling in school and had recently been selected for an advanced academic program. Dear Princess, the letter read, I know you probably don't remember us personally, but I wanted you to know that the program you developed quite literally changed my daughter's life. She went from struggling with basic social interactions to being chosen as student council president. Thank you for believing in children like her. William watched, his eyes fill with tears as she read the letter. This personal validation of her work's impact was worth more than any professional recognition or institutional endorsement. It represented the human reality behind all the research data and policy discussions. This is why the work matters, said softly, holding the letter carefully. Every study and every presentation is ultimately about creating opportunities for children to discover their potential. As they prepared for bed that evening, William reflected on the journey they had traveled together over the past year. His transformation from someone struggling with self-doubt to an internationally recognized expert had required strategic thinking, emotional support, and institutional change. But most importantly, it had required recognizing and protecting his inherent value and capabilities. I have something to tell you, said as they settled into their bedroom. I've been offered a position as visiting professor at Cambridge for the spring semester. It would involve teaching graduate students and continuing my research. William felt a surge of pride at this latest recognition of his expertise. A visiting professorship at Cambridge represented academic credibility at the highest level, confirming that her contributions to the field were valued entirely on their merits. "That's incredible," William responded immediately. "You absolutely should accept if you want to do it." Smile was radiant with accomplishment and anticipation. "I do want to do it. For the first time in my royal career, I feel like I'm contributing something unique and valuable rather than just fulfilling ceremonial obligations." As they talked about the practical arrangements for academic appointment, William considered how completely their family dynamics had been transformed. Success had created a new model for royal service that combined traditional duties with genuine expertise and measurable impact. The conversation gradually turned to their children and how to help them develop the same kind of resilience and self-confidence that had ultimately protected from psychological pressure. Teaching their children to value their own judgment while remaining open to constructive feedback would be crucial for their future happiness and effectiveness. "I want them to know that their worth isn't determined by other people's opinions," said thoughtfully. "But I also want them to understand the value of expertise and hard work." William agreed completely, recognizing that the lessons learned from experience would be invaluable for raising children who could navigate complex social and professional pressures while maintaining their integrity and sense of purpose. As they finally settled into sleep, William felt deep satisfaction with the outcome of his protective efforts. Was not only safe from future psychological pressure, but positioned to pursue her most ambitious goals with confidence and institutional support. The combination of personal growth and professional achievement represented everything he had hoped to accomplish when he first recognized the need to intervene. "Thank you for seeing who I really was when I had forgotten it myself," said quietly in the darkness. William's response carried the weight of both personal love and shared commitment to their future together. "Protecting your ability to do this work was protecting something much larger than just our family. The world needs what you have to offer." The truth of those words had been proven conclusively over the past months. This innovative approach to royal service represented a model for how the monarchy could remain relevant and valuable to contemporary society. Ensuring that model could flourish had been one of the most important achievements of William's life, both as a husband and as a future king. In the quiet of their private quarters, surrounded by the security and comfort of their family life, William felt confident that they had established foundations strong enough to support whatever challenges and opportunities the future might bring. His transformation was complete, but more importantly, it was sustainable because it was built on genuine achievement, institutional support, and unshakable personal strength. The protection he had provided had been necessary and effective, but its ultimate success was her own achievement. She had rediscovered her confidence, developed her expertise, and claimed her rightful place as a leader in her chosen field. The future looked brighter than ever for both their family and the causes they served together.